What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I am coming at you with what I think is a really important sort of discussion that needs to happen, and talking about what happened with Red Reboot being banned on the last ban list. Now, this is something that has become more and more apparent to me after it's been banned, and something Reboot filled a role in the game, and I sort of want to talk about what Yu-Gi-Oh is lacking now with Reboot no longer being in the game, and then sort of reflect on what needs to sort of happen if Reboot is going to stay banned on the list, and how Yu-Gi-Oh! And hopefully Konami sort of takes an approach to card design going forward. And before we get into this discussion, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below along with all of our other social media links. Also, I'm trying to hit 20,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out in what I do here on the channel. And yeah, without further ado, let's start talking about Red Reboot and, you know, sort of its role to me. So, Reboot, obviously being banned on this last list, has given back row decks sort of a small buff. While I don't think back row decks are going to be super big or popular due to Reboot being banned, it's worthy to note that Reboot was always designed to be sort of a counter to back row decks. You know, cards or decks like Eldritch are a great example, even though this was made way before Eldritch's time, but Eldritch has been sort of the standard for back row decks in recent years. Yeah, it was designed for back row decks and essentially giving combo decks another tool to help fight against, you know, set 5 boards, right? And Reboot, originally, I think even when it came out, I was not playing during Reboot's release, so I don't know the full story, but I have friends who played during that time. The way they talk about Reboot being a nightmare, and essentially you had to, it being at 3, back row decks had to main deck for Reboot, right? Because it's at 3. And back row decks fell off the map. I know around the time of its release, like, Altergeist was okay. And, you know, I mean, Altergeist was good, I should say. And there were back row decks existing like Salad, which, you know, more of a mid-range, but it had traps. But as far as set 5, I think the only thing was maybe Geist. And honestly, I'm surprised Geist could even compete in a meta with 3 Reboot. But yeah, Red Reboot, obviously being way too powerful, got put to 1 eventually, right? Sort of leading to where we were before this recent ban list. That's gonna be as much as the history sort of lesson I can give, because I wasn't there during the time, right? But Reboot got put to 1 because 1 card should not trade with 4 or 5 cards, in my opinion. Things like Feather Duster, you could argue, is like the same thing, but your opponent being able to chain to Feather Duster with a myriad of different cards, right? Like, you look at, you know, if you're talking about a card like Feather Duster, I'll just pull it up here so everyone knows what card I'm talking about. It destroys all spells and traps your opponent controls. You know, honestly, I guess I should have looked at Reboot as well, in case for some reason no one knows what Reboot is. Essentially, Reboot, unlike Feather Duster that just destroys all spells and traps your opponent controls, it negates a trap card by paying half your life points. They can set a trap from their deck, but then they can't activate trap cards for the rest of the turn. So when you look at a card like Feather Duster, right, and you might be like, Feather Duster's the same as Reboot against a back row deck. It's really not, because 1, your opponent can chain things to Feather Duster, which is relevant in a bunch of different situations, but also there's so many more outs. Like, when you talk about an out to Reboot, it's essentially just Solemn Judgment, potentially Dark Bribe if you're going really heavy into it. But you talk about, like, Feather Duster, there's Starlight Road, you have the Huge Revolution is over. And if Feather Duster and Lightning Storm were the only cards you had to prepare for, these 3 cards would be like a lot better in back row decks, right? And you know, you of course have things like Anti-Spell Fragrance, which I also don't think should be in the game, but they are an out to Feather Duster. All of these out something like a Feather Duster or a Lightning Storm for heavy back row decks. While Reboot, none of these work. These are all decimated by Reboot. But then, like, take a look at a card like Backjack in certain trap decks, and it's becoming more relevant because of Labyrinth, and there's a few decks that play Backjack like BA. If you get Feather Dustered and you mill a Backjack, you still have the chance to get another trap and activate one. Under Reboot, you're just toast, right? So what I'm trying to show with this is that Reboot is so much more oppressive than a card like Feather Duster or Lightning Storm. There's just so many more outs, right? And that is why I think Reboot needs to go. That's my argument for Reboot being banned. And personally, I guess I haven't laid my opinion out there. I think Reboot needed to be banned. Again, I do not think 1 card should trade with 4 or 5 cards against the heavy back row decks. That's a little absurd, a little unfair. That being said, I feel like Reboot had a role in the game, right? And I'm going to bring up some cards here. I'm going to get these off the screen. I'm going to bring up some cards that are just really what Reboot in modern times, like past its release, what it's been for the last year and a half for me, and what its role really was, is to negate cards like Featherstorm. We have Dimensional Barrier that was really big in the Sword Soul Despia meta. You have things that are really relevant now like Eradicator Epidemic Virus or Deck Devastation Virus. Cards like these, right? These are, I mean, you could throw in this card as well, which isn't super relevant now, but it's been relevant in the past, like Tri-Brigade format, Tri-Brigade Drytron format. These cards right here. Currently, without Reboot in the game, these cards have 0 answers, and that is extremely problematic. It leaves the biggest hole that Yu-Gi-Oh has in its entire game with card design, is the fact that these cards cannot be outed by anything. Technically, if you want to get extremely technical, there is one out in the game. It's Cross-Out Designator, like you could technically cross out any of these cards. That being said, you're not running cross-out for cards like these. You're not siding 1 Erad with 3 cross-out to negate it. That's just not reasonable. Technically they have an out, but without Reboot in the game, these cards are nearly uncontested. And with how fast our metagame is, even though these are sort of the one-turn floodgates that in design and maybe Konami's point of view, you know, you take a look at a card like D-Barrier compared to Non-Fusion Area, right? D-Barrier lasts for 1 turn, and Non-Fusion Area, you could have fusions cut off forever, right? So technically, it is the more powerful card. But D-Barrier not being able to be interacted with is what actually makes it insane. You can't MST this card, you know, for like Runic Destruction, Lightning Storm. D-Barrier is going to resolve. And another one I guess I should put here is like Sanctum. But Sanctum can be ashed, so it actually has a real counter. But we'll put it in here for discussion as well. Reboot's job in the game was being the only card that could deal with things like these. And Reboot, that is the argument to keep Reboot in the game, is these cards are uncontested. They 90% of the time feel like they win the game on their own. Featherstorm and Fluandereeze is disgusting. D-Barrier has its formats where it's just game, like Despia Sword Soul format. Barrier felt so oppressive. In that format, I really felt like Reboot should have been at 3, and I hate Reboot. So I wanted to talk about sort of Reboot's role before I get into the bulk of this video, or what I really wanted to talk about, which is what we need in the game. A card we actually need. Yu-Gi-Oh needs a card like this, and it's Konami's time, I think, to sort of design a card like this for things like this. And I just used this way too many times. But besides that, what am I talking about, right? So obviously we discussed that cards like those have no outs. Now you look at a card I really want to talk about is Blizzard, right? Blizzard here, target 1 face-up spell your opponent controls. This turn, negate the activated effects of that spell and all spells on the field with that same original name. And then if the target card be sent to the graveyard, this turn is added to their hand. This is really good because, say, like, a card, like, Mistaken Arrest, right? I'll bring up Mistaken Arrest. Let's bring up Blizzard and Mistaken Arrest. This is, of course, we're in the realm of spells. However, this is a very relevant thing to what I'm going to talk about Reboot. Say your opponent activates Mistaken Arrest. There is actually a card in the game that interacts with Floodgate spell cards like Mistaken Arrest or Shared Ride. It's Blizzard. You can target that face-up spell, and this sort of like Hot Red negates it, and Hot Red, for those that don't know, just targets a face-up card your opponent controls and negates its effects. And Blizzard here can negate something like Mistaken Arrest. I do not understand why we don't have a Blizzard type card for traps. Like, this is one of the most balanced cards I've ever read in my life, and that's why you never see anyone play it. One, like, cards like Mistaken Arrest aren't super popular, so that's a reason not to play it, I guess. But, you know, this card should exist for traps. It does exactly what Reboot does without being super oppressive. This stops one card. It's a 1-for-1 trade, but it deals with an uninteractable floodgate, which could let you play that turn. So I want to talk about Red Reboot again. Let's bring up Red Reboot, because Blizzard was sort of the thing I wanted to bring up. Like, you read Blizzard and it's obvious I think we need something like that for traps. So we take a look at Red Reboot. How do we fix Red Reboot into a new card that actually makes it a reasonable card that can stay at 3, something that might be a staple forever, but not super broken or super oppressive? Like, I don't think anyone is complaining that Cosmic Cyclone really outclassed MST. Like, as the game progresses, we do need new staples that keep up with our common metagame, and I think some people have recommended, here's an effect I'm going to list off that people have, I think Joshua Schmidt talked about it, and people have brought up a card like this forever. It's a card that just targets any card on the field, like a new Cosmic Cyclone, like a quick play spell, or maybe a trap like Imperm, that targets a card on the field and negates it. Personally, I think that's like a 2033 card, and we need like a 2023 card. It's just too generic and too powerful with like no cost, right? Like, why play Imperm if a card like that exists, or a card like Cosmic? Like, you're making every other card printed before it outclassed and near unusable unless you want to double up on certain types of interruptions. Now, I don't want a card like that. Now, if I was to rework Red Reboot while keeping Cosmic to be a relevant card, while keeping, you know, Lightning Storm relevant, all the cards we already have relevant, but a different role is now filled by a certain card, here's how I would change Red Reboot, and I'll put it up here on the screen to what I would want the effect to be. And it's going to look very similar to Red Reboot. Now, it could either be a counter trap or not a counter trap. Not super relevant. I think being a counter trap would be fine. Now, Red Reboot had a serious cost, so I want to keep a cost on this card. I don't want it to do it for free. That'd be insane. So I'm thinking like maybe a 1,000 life point cost like Cosmic would be fair enough, because this card is going to be extremely fair but fill a role. And I think you can keep this part of Reboot's text, that is when your opponent activates a trap card, negate the activation and destroy it, and that's all the card would really have to say, right? What that card does, and if you just have it do that, like you could change the cost if you wanted to, something more than 1,000, less than 1,000, something that makes it not free. Maybe, like, there are some costs in the games that are ridiculous and wouldn't work in this situation, like Imperm, where you have to control no cards. Obviously that won't work if you're playing into back row. But if Red Reboot just had like its first line of text, when your opponent activates a trap card, pay 1,000 life points, negate the activation of that trap card, and destroy it. You can only use this effect of X card once per turn. That would instantly, and it can be at 3, it's not as powerful as Reboot, it doesn't like destroy 5 back row from your opponent with 1 card and just ensures their demise. Like, when you're playing a trap deck against Red Reboot, right, you lost. But yeah, we take a look at the cards I brought up earlier, right? This is the type of card we are trying to hit with this. We are running new Reboot is what I'll call it for this video, which is going to be called New Reboot. We just need a role in the game being fulfilled by a card without it being so oppressive it has to be banned. I personally hope Red Reboot never comes back off the list. I just want Konami to design a card that does sort of what I said. A card like D-Barrier is now, it has an out. It's not uninteractable with every single card in the game besides Crossout Designator, which again, not really relevant. Although I will say, when I took Sword Soul to the Fort Worth Regional back in May in Sword Soul Despia format, I did side D-Barrier and Crossout. So that was something I was actually going for because D-Barrier was so ridiculous. But again, I think Reboot needs to be its role that is now gone in the game, and we have to deal with insanely powerful floodgates. It needs to be filled, and I think this card I'm sort of proposing or talking about, it is fair enough to be in the game at 3, and it's super good. It's definitely worth citing. It's incredibly powerful, but it's not insane. So let me know what you guys think of this down below. Are you a fan of Reboot? Are you not a fan of Reboot? Definitely curious. I know a lot of people are split on this, maybe not the same as Max C. There's a lot of people who just never play trap card decks and are extremely biased one way, that are like, well, I hate back row, so Red Reboot's fine. But then there's the other side that's extremely biased. They play a lot of back row, and they're like, Red Reboot is completely unfair. I think if you look at it unbiased in all situations, to me personally, one card that trades with 4 that almost can't be interacted with, yeah, it deserves to be banned. That, like, when you say that, how is that not like a bannable card? So yeah, leave your comments down below though, because I know a lot of people are very divisive when it comes to Reboot, similar to something like Max C. Yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. How would you fix this role in the game? Obviously, I proposed a card I think would be nice to have in the game, but there's a bunch of different ways you can go about this. You could make it, you know, a little more broken, even more balanced, like not be a counter trap, right? So yeah, I'm curious to read what you guys think down below and sort of maybe just even how you feel about where we are in a format where the turn floodgates or viruses are just like so hard to interact with and almost unstoppable. But yep, that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.